I want to talk about kind of the lowest hanging fruit I think you can get to optimizing your backend to increase its speed. And this is the removal of N+1 queries in your database. So I'm going to kind of break down what those are and then what I use to solve them with my Django backend. But this would really relate to any kind of specific or any kind of backend that you have. This isn't specific to Django. I'll just be using Django as an example because that is the backend that I have with the Roads app and kind of what I've been using for my backend more recently. So what an N+1 query is it might sound a bit confusing, but essentially all it is if you're trying to get an object or a list of objects really, and then those objects are also going to get something that's related to them, if you don't write your queries the correct way, what's going to happen in the database is it's going to make a call to get the list of objects, and then it's going to make additional calls to get all those related objects. So let me give you kind of an example here. In Roads, there's kind of a feed, and actually you can think of this for any app, but let's say you have a homepage feed, and this is going to return 10 items. So I'm looking to get 10 conversations in Roads, for example. So let's just call them posts. So we're trying to get 10 posts in the feed, but then on each post in our feed, we also want to display if the user has listened to the post or not. So if you don't optimize this correctly, the query, what the typical thing that you might do is just call you'll call the database to get the list of posts, and it will return those posts to you. And then in your serializer, you might go and say, oh, go get me the user's listen. So once we have the posts, go get the listen for me. And that is going to create essentially 11 database calls. So there's going to be the initial call that's going to get you the 10 posts, and then each one of those posts is going to make another call to get its listen. And obviously, you can see that is not an optimized setup, and it actually can really slow down your app, especially if you don't have any kind of like paging or like infinite scroll kind of setup. Because instead of getting 10, it might get 1,000. It might go and get 100 or 100 or 1,000 or however many posts it's going to get. And then it's going to go make 1,000 calls to your database or 100 calls to your database. And this is kind of a really, I guess it's a relatively simple thing to fix. It's just a different way of writing your code and basically prefetching the data that you know you're going to need in this example, on that homepage. So on that homepage, I know I'm going to need to listen for every single post that I get. So I could craft the query differently so that when I get the post, I also get the listen, and then it's just one database call. And that one database call might take fractions of a second longer, but you're not going to be making the N+1. That's why it's called an N+1, because it's in this case would represent the post, the post list. That's the query that you're actually doing, but then it's +1 for every post that you get in that list. So there are tools that you can use to figure out where in your app these kind of things are happening on your backend. And in Django, the tool that I have been using is called Django Debug Toolbar, which I can link this down in the description on the YouTube page. But if you're listening to this on Roads, you could just search Django Debug Toolbar and then add that package. And the documentation is pretty good. But basically what this will let you do is if you go to your kind of API view in your Django app in the browser, there'll be a nice toolbar now on the side that will pop up, and it'll tell you the amount of SQL queries that you get when you make a call. So if you go to an API endpoint in your browser, it'll tell you that, for example, that you're making one query or 3 queries or 100. And if it's a lot, then you'll know that could be a good indication that you have an N+1 query. I mean, the real way you'll know is, for example, if you're returning all the posts for a specific user and you go and add another post and you see that SQL query went up by any amount, it might go up by 1, it might go up by 2, but then that means you have this issue. And within the view of it, you can also kind of see how or which queries are doing that. But I think also, yeah, once you identify the ones that have the issues, really it's a matter of figuring out the data that you need. So as I already said, keeping with this post example, if you want to get the listen, really what you're going to do is you're going to keep the same thing where you do some sort of filter where you're saying get all the posts for this specific user, but then after that you're going to add an additional prefetched related, and this is more specific to Django, but it is the same concept in whatever backend you're using. You will do something like this where you're going to get the related items. So in this case, we would get the related listen for that user. And then the nice thing is, if you're, again, this is a little bit more specific to Django, but in the Django serializer then, which is where you actually kind of format the data that you got from your database and you send it to the front end. In the serializer, you'll just access the listen data from the query set that you created. So I'm not going to go super in depth of like the actual writing of the code, but more just talking about this concept of identify where these are, and then use a tool, figure out, I mean, depending on what your backend is, if you just search how to identify N+1 queries in, Django or in Node.js or Ruby on Rails, you'll find a package that does this for you and identifies it. And then honestly, with these, a lot of times I will use an AI tool to help me rewrite the query, and that's helpful as well. I mean, it's pretty easy because you know exactly what you want. You can show it what you have, and you're like, I'm getting all the posts here. I want to get the posts and the listens. How can I do that? And then sometimes you have to show it your model, or if you're using something that is built into your code base, it should be able to identify that pretty quickly, because this is a pretty common pattern, and it can save you. It could save you so much load time. That's the nice thing about this. It's pretty easy to do. It's a good practice to have these set up in a more optimized way. And if your site is loading really slowly and you feel like the data is taking a long time to get there, this is, in my opinion, the easiest way to really speed that up. And I think you'll actually be surprised if you do this in your app. You'll be surprised at how much faster it actually makes the load times go. So yeah, if you have any other ideas for easy optimizations for your backend or really any aspect of your website or app, let me know. And this is currently the only optimization I have set up, or that I actually look into and I build into the first versions. Because the other thing with optimizing is you don't want to, I think you don't want to spend a ton of time on it, especially when you're getting the app up and running and just started. But for this, this almost doesn't seem like an optimization to me anymore. It almost feels like this is just the correct way to get data. And this is because of the speed improvement is so big that it's both a speed improvement and a resource intensive call. If you're making all these extra calls, it's going to slow down your server. It's going to put more strain on your server. So there is, at scale, also a cost benefit to having these more optimized queries, which that isn't the reason to do this. This is not to save money. That's not the reason to do this, because in a small scale project, that's not going to be noticeable, but the speed of it is definitely going to be noticeable, and that is a reason to do this. So yeah, hopefully you found this useful. If you did want to see, I guess, more of an in-depth guide of how to do this in a video format, let me know. And if you want to discuss this further, I also would love to hear what your thoughts are on optimizing and making apps run faster. To get early access to these conversations and contribute with your own thoughts, join the One Man Startup channel on Rhodes Audio today by going to onemanstartup.com/join Rhodes.